Air raid sirens are being reported from almost across Ukraine, with multiple missile and rocket strikes evading the state-of-the-art air defense systems. Information from Russia seems to indicate that a prominent NATO military training facility was hit in Poltava, calling it a legitimate military strike inside Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, says civilians were massacred, not just in Poltava, but also in Sumy and Lviv. Yulia Klemenkov is a member of parliament in Kiev. She joins me from a bomb shelter on this special broadcast. Also with me on this broadcast from Moscow is Tatiana Kukareva with the latest on Russian operations. We'll talk to both of them one after the other. Also on India first, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Singapore after his successful visit to Brunei. This is part of India's Act East policy. It's also ensuring that China expansionist forces are kept in check. Details coming up. I'm Gaurav Sawant as always. Let's get started with the headlines on India first. Battle lines drawn in Haryana. Photograph of Rahul Gandhi with Dinesh Fogart and Bajrang Punia. Sparks of speculation were whether the Olympic wrestlers will contest on the Congress party ticket. BJP releases first list. 9 sitting MLAs dropped. Samajwadi Party Chief Akhilesh Yadav slams bulldozer action in Uttar Pradesh, says Yogi Adityanath's Gorakhpur bastion will be raised post 2027 elections. Yogi Adityanath hits back, claims only the culpable and only the capable can steer a bulldozer and the culpable are scared. Bollywood sex abuse storm unravels. Actor Naveen Pauly booked for alleged gang rape but refutes charges. Kannada film actors also seek probe into harassment charges in Sandalwood. Big peace boost in the northeast. Centre signs a peace deal with Tripura insurgents after they lay down arms. Union Home Minister Amit Shah hails the agreement, says decade-long struggle finally ends. Prime Minister Narendra Modi gets a grand welcome in Singapore, meets his counterpart, boosting strategic partnership, attracting investment, the top focus. There's been a sudden and massive escalation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with Russian missiles and rockets hitting what Moscow insists was a legitimate military training facility in Poltava, Ukraine. There have been multiple missile and rocket strikes in the past 48 hours in Ukraine, from Poltava to Sumy to even Lviv in the western part of the country, considered safe by and large. But these strikes in the past 48 hours have resulted in close to 60 deaths and over 200 injuries reported. Russian missiles have also hit Kharkiv. In midst of this conflict, Ukraine's president Volodymyr Zelenskyy has ordered a major reshuffle in his government to bring in what he describes as new energy and new diplomacy. 4 ministers have resigned, many more may do so in the next 24 hours.
Destruction and devastation. These images are from Ukraine's Poltava. At least 51 people were killed and hundreds of people injured after 2 Russian ballistic missiles hit a military institute. This is one of the deadliest attacks launched by Russia on Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy claimed that the toll might increase as several are still trapped under the rubble.
It is known that there are people under the rubble of the destroyed building. Everything is done to save as many lives as possible. According to the information available at this time, this Russian strike has killed 51 people.
Soon after the strike, Russia launched its missile on Lviv, which killed 7 people, including 3 children. The attack left more than 30 people injured.
Загинули люди,
People have died. We have confirmed information about 7 people who died, including 3 children, small children. Huge destruction. More than 70 buildings across the city were damaged. They all belong to historic heritage.
Amid the non-stop attacks, 4 Ukrainian ministers have stepped down from the cabinet as part of a major government reshuffle aimed at bringing what President Volodymyr Zelenskyy calls new energy to the war-torn nation.
Я вже говорив про перезавантаження нашого Кабінету міністрів.
I have already mentioned the rebooting of the government as well as many ministries. I am very grateful to the ministers and the whole government team that worked for Ukraine and Ukrainians for 4.5 years and some for 5 years. We need new energy today, and these steps are related only to the strengthening of our state in different directions.
Посиленням нашої держави на різних напрямках.
Блять, это пиздец, сука!
The attacks came days after Ukraine launched a 9/11-like drone attack in Russia's Saratov region. According to Russia's defense ministry, Ukraine was training warfare specialists in Poltava who allegedly strike at civilian targets in Russia. Russia claimed that they hit Ukrainian defense industry facilities in Lviv, which manufactured and repaired electronic components for the Ukrainian Air Force. Bureau Report, India Today.
And for more on the latest in Ukraine, let me quickly bring into this conversation Yulia Klemenkov, a member of parliament in Ukraine, who joins me from a bomb shelter in Ukraine. Ms. Klemenko, I hope all is well. I hope you are safe. What's the latest situation on ground in Ukraine right now, ma'am?
Hello, thank you for hosting me. Yes, we do have 2 days of a terrible Russian attacks to basically civilian infrastructure. So yesterday it was a big attack to Poltava, the city, in which was killed at least 50 people were killed and more than 200 were injured. Today at night we have a terrible strike on the residential homes in Lviv, in the western region of Ukraine, and it was at this point of time we know about 7 people killed, and including 3 kids, and more than 50 people injured. So it's absolutely barbaric attacks, and it's against civilian infrastructure and civilian population, not on the battlefield.
Okay.
That's how we live. We are living every night in bomb shelters because we have airstrikes, and unfortunately, our kids sitting in the bomb shelters, and we also sitting in the bomb shelters during these missile attacks. So that's how we live every day. So that's actually a peace made by Putin. So it's his way of peace. He sees.
Okay. Yulia Klemenko, several ministers have quit today. We are told some more are on their way out in the next 24 to 48 hours. In midst of this conflict, President Zelenskyy is talking about new energy and new diplomacy. Is this the best way forward during conflict in your country?
No, I don't think it's the best approach. I think stability inside the country is one of the front lines we have to keep, because we need to fight on a battlefield, not inside the country. And I think reshaping and reshuffling of the ministers is not the best way how we can improve state management. So today, actually, Verkhovna Rada, Parliament of Ukraine, took resignation and voted for the resignation of 4 ministers. Now we have 22 out of 22 ministers in the cabinet of ministry. We have 5 acting ministers and 4 fired ministers, and only 13 ministers who is really ministers. And this is a very bad situation for the country in a full-scale war, because we need to take decision every day. I hope tomorrow We will talking in the parliament. We will talking about the appointment of a new ministers, and then the cabinet of ministry will be finally reshaped and can work properly for the one big purpose, and goal is to get victory on a battlefield and get peace to Ukraine.
You know, you speak of getting victory in the battlefield, and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been seeking longer range weapons. He's been seeking missiles and fighter jets. But what's your response, and what do you think that the response of your Western partners has been? Has it been rather lukewarm?
Yes, at this point of time, unfortunately, even after these terrible, tragic attacks on a civilian infrastructure past 2 days, we still don't have any permission for the long range use long range weapon to target military bases and military targets of Russians on their territory. We need it badly because otherwise we cannot win war. So you cannot win war if you cannot respond to your enemy and to their military bases. They are destroying not military bases inside Ukraine, but I would like to point they are destroying civil infrastructure, and we need to protect civil infrastructure and civilians in Ukraine. It's very important, and we can do it only by long-range attacks to the military bases of Russia.
But do you sense some kind of reluctance? Is fatigue setting in with slow delivery of weapons and systems? You're not getting the weapons and systems at the pace at which you want them.
No, we don't see it. We have packages approved. Yes, in general, they are going and coming very slowly, but in general, so they are dedicate and to the approved packages. The problem is only in delivery of fighter jets and delivery of long-range missiles and a weapon.
But are missiles and weapons and fighter jets the only way forward? Is President Zelenskyy on the right track, or is there now need for some dialogue between Russia and Ukraine, perhaps a ceasefire first to save lives and property?
You know, if Putin wants ceasefire, he shouldn't destroy infrastructure, civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. So what we can see at this point of time, that Putin doesn't want peace, and Putin doesn't want peace deals and negotiations. He just need to proceed with taking lives of Ukrainian kids, destroying our homes, and we don't see any signs of Putin willingness to talk about peace.
Okay. Because this war has been on for, over 900 days. Is there an apprehension post-November, if President Trump returns to White House, will support for Ukraine be adversely impacted in your view?
I don't think it will be immediate and a big change because, in US, it's institutions working very properly. It's not depending only on one leader who is elected. It's also about institutions, and I think it will be a new discussion with a new coming president, but I don't think that the policy will change overnight.
Okay. And the strategy that's been adopted by Ukraine, before I let you go, I just want to understand from you that Ukrainian forces have made this very audacious attack into Kursk, and has that made you more vulnerable along the Donetsk axis? Because there are some reports that seem to indicate that Ukrainian defenses seem to be crumbling on that front.
No, I don't think so. We actually, as this operation on Kursk, were properly planned. So we have enough troops on both both directions. But unfortunately, because of the lack of weapon, we cannot, sometimes we cannot sustain, particularly long-range weapon. We cannot sustain Russian machine, which is has a lot of weapon, and they do not care about civilians, do not care about civilian infrastructure, and killing people without any reason. So it's very difficult to sustain with this barbarian type of war.
It's very difficult to sustain the kind of operations that Ukraine is. You stay safe, Yulia Klemenko, for joining me here on India Today. Many thanks. Russia, on the other hand, of course, insists it's only hitting legitimate military targets at a time when Ukraine is openly talking about seeking longer range weapons to strike deeper into Russia, where Ukrainian drones and rockets have also hit civilians in Russia. Let me now bring into this conversation Tatiana Kokareva. She's a senior Russian journalist, very closely tracking not just the war at the front lines, but also events or action at the Kremlin. Tatiana, may I begin by asking you, Ukraine says Russian missiles have hit civilian targets, killing close to 60 civilians in Ukraine. Russia is being accused of specifically targeting hospitals, not just when Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Russia, but even now, ma'am.
Hi, Gaurav. So, Ukraine has been accusing Russia of targeting civilians from the get-go. But the point being that, you can hardly call a military institute that is being used to prepare people for war, you can hardly count that as a civilian target. And when we look at the strike on Poltava, in which exactly that, a military institute was hit, it's a huge stretch to call that a civilian target. Whether we see, hits from the Ukrainian side on the central cities of, central Belgrade, where there's nothing to even come close to a military side target within, a couple of kilometers. It's a very big difference. But I can't quite fathom as to how the Ukrainian side is spinning out of this one, because calling a military institute that we've heard has been used to prepare fighters, including NATO instructors being on site, how you can possibly spin this as a hit on civilian targets is beyond my imagination, really.
Okay, but has Ukraine's counter-offensive in Kursk, 1, taken Russia by surprise? 2, the reason for this current round of what Ukraine describes is major escalation?
Well, look, I wouldn't call it an escalation. The Russian side, Moscow, has been very clear from the very beginning. We're hitting military targets. The centers of preparation of fighters are very clearly military targets. And you see, Volodymyr Zelenskyy asking on daily basis for longer range missiles on every single platform available to him. So I wouldn't necessarily call this an escalation.
Okay.
We're just continuing the same strategy, I would say. Destroying military targets and any possibility, especially with Ukraine being very, very clear that they want to hit targets deep inside Russia. And they haven't been shy on those, ambitions either for months now.
But what's the end game now? How do you appreciate what the end game could well be? Does Russia have a roadmap for peace and perhaps a ceasefire? What's the thinking in Kremlin?
Well, in my personal opinion, as a person, generally speaking, it's one thing to get a fighter jet, is another thing to be able to use it properly. So getting, advanced equipment is very different from being able to efficiently use it. And I'd say the Russian military forces have been very, very successful at hitting those Western supplied advanced machinery. We get these reports on a daily basis. We see those pictures of, tanks, very advanced rocket launchers being destroyed. So I'd say this has been consistently successful on from our point of view.
Okay.
In the meantime, basically the President Putin has been very clear, again, from the very beginning of this conflict, is that we are ready to come to a negotiations table, but it needs to be a negotiation. It can't be just, Ukraine backed by its Western sponsors saying, look, this is what we want. And there's there's a peace process. Any negotiation has to A, include Russia, and B, it has to happen on the exact terms that the president has laid out months ago.
So is there any middle ground? Because Russia too is reported to have deployed longer range weapons and missiles. Is there a message here, not just for Ukraine, but for NATO allies and the United States on weapons supply to Ukraine?
Well, look, I think the president has been very clear on those red lines, but so far, I think that the most dangerous thing that we can do is, kind of spin this a little bit out of proportion. So far, yes, the NATO countries are supplying Ukraine, and we've said it repeatedly, that the main thing for us and for any person with a normal perspective, is that you can't have anything resembling anything moving towards a peaceful solution or a resolution of this conflict when you're kind of supplying weaponry and pulling fuel to the fire with one hand, and with the other hand you're saying, oh, we want a peaceful resolution for Ukraine. So if anything, the biggest message here is that they should stop the hypocrisy. You can't put in more weaponry and then talk about any type of resolution to the conflict. Just like prior to the beginning of this conflict, they were pouring in millions in lethal aid into Ukraine and saying, look, we are not doing anything, we're just preparing for Russian aggression, and then we're just, this is just aid. It's the same thing, you can't kind of fuel this conflict and say, oh, well, we're for peace here.
On India Today, we've told you both sides of the story. We've also given you details of the ground realities. Tatiana, for joining me here on India Today, many thanks. Let me now take you to Singapore. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Singapore, which is India's largest trading partner in the ASEAN. It's also a leading source of foreign direct investment. In the last financial year, it had an investment of $11.77 billion. That was in 2023 alone. Now, during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit, there will be multiple MOUs that will be signed. This is cooperation in manpower skilling, and manpower skilling in the semiconductor sector would be a major game changer, because this is where both India and Singapore are seeking much closer cooperation. There are agreements that are likely in the areas of maritime security, extremely important when it comes to free and open Indo-Pacific, and that's a major signal to expansionist powers in the region. Digitalization, skill development, sustainability, health and connectivity. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also tried his hands on the dhol as he was welcomed with traditional Indian performances in Singapore. I want to leave you with these amazing images from Singapore.
Ramachandra ki